the future. So the full presentation, which you probably have memorized by now, in this part of the competition, you are taking on fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, the teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback that will be helpful to seeing what you did extremely well and what might also be helpful should you ever do this again, and what, looking ahead to the 10-minute, we might have as any possible thoughts. Some important things to keep in mind: the ethical aspect of your analysis are the most important. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. So welcome. And I will introduce the judges first so you have a sense of who's here. And I'm a longtime person, delighted to have been involved with IBEC for at least a decade as an Uber judge. I'm an executive coach and focus on leadership and ethics and values after a long corporate career. And I would love it if the judges would give a little bit of background about themselves so that the team knows who they're talking to.
So I'll go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Sonnen, and I have been involved in IBEC for quite a few years, have been a judge for a few. I'm currently the ethics program manager for BAE Systems, a defense contractor, and I'm located in Southern New Hampshire. So it's great to see y'all and good luck.
Next. Gary?
I'll go, and then I'll hand it off to Jeff next. My name is Greg Mayer. I'm a patent attorney. I'm based in the Chicago area. My background's aerospace engineering, so very interested to hear about British aerospace. That's cool. And this is my 2nd year judging the IBEC competition, and happy to be here. Thanks a lot. And Jeff, you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. My name is Jeff Cable. I work for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I helped to establish their ethics office, so I guess it's been about 17 years ago now. Probably about 8 years ago, I kind of made a transition into our enterprise content management team, where a lot of my focus is on data privacy and how we handle information from both an ethical and technical perspective. I have some peripheral, I guess, connections. Maria, you may not know this, John Truslow and I were study partners a long time ago at the University of Montana, and I grew up in Maine, so we have some peripheral ties in common, and it's nice to see BAE Systems again represented. Thanks.
Thank you. Mira?
So I will close. It's Mirai Pereira. I'm with DuPont, and I've been with DuPont forever. And I've been involved with IBEC for well over a decade, judged in the past. I'm currently working in our mergers and acquisitions, setting up all the company separations and acquisitions that we're doing that have become very common these days.
Thank you very much. We have a great group of judges, and we'd love to know something more about the Fordham Consulting Group.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much, first and foremost. We're absolutely delighted to be here. My name is John Mason. I'm a senior at Fordham studying economics. and today I'm a representative of the Fordham Consulting Group. And to be clear on the identity of the judges in this case, we want you to assume that you are Colonial Pipeline Company's CEO, Joseph Blount, who has unilateral control over this decision.
My name is Michael Worley. I'm also a senior at Fordham University in the Fordham Consulting Group, helping with the presentation with John.
Yep, and I'm Alexander Luna. I'm a senior at Fordham studying finance. Just happy to be here working as a part of the group with these two other great guys.
We look forward to hearing you, and if there's nothing else you need to know, I'm going to hit start, and you know that you've got 25 minutes, but I'm doing it for 20. When the bell goes off, you're done, if you're not already done. All right? Now.
Good afternoon. My name is John Mason, and I am here as a representative of the Fordham Consulting Group, along with my partners Alex Luna and Michael Worley. Our mission today is to help the Colonial Pipeline Company address the unforeseen and largely threatening ransomware attack on the company's vital infrastructure. Ultimately, our goal is to act to protect the company and its stakeholders with efficiency and efficacy, while acting within the bounds of what is legally, financially, and ethically responsible. We'll begin by presenting the facts and analysis as we understand them to help you make the most informed decision pertaining to the attack. Our financial and legal analysis will frame a lawful approach to resolution while highlighting possible effects on Colonial's financial and economic standing. We will then offer what we have determined to be the most advisable solution, most apt to ethically navigate this critical inflection point for Colonial Pipelines. We will begin our presentation by walking you through the context of the attack, highlighting important agents and key facts that are going to be vital to making an accurate appraisal of the situation and potential solutions. Firstly, we would like to present the three most important variables in understanding context, those being major timelines, major actors, and major events. On May 7th, 2021, your private entity, Colonial Pipelines, reported that they were victims of a powerful ransomware attack. We have identified that the attack was perpetrated by cyber criminal group DarkSide, a Russian-based syndicate that have been flagged as cyber assailants in a number of other isolated ransomware attacks on American businesses. The attack forced a complete pipeline shutdown, which precipitated an immediate cease in Colonial's operation. The vector of this illegal and unwarranted attack remains unidentified at this stage. However, what we do know is that the encrypted ransomware has inhibited vital operative systems, namely the company's billing infrastructure. With the billing systems compromised, CPC has been forced to shut down all 5,500 miles of company pipeline, which spans from Texas to New Jersey. Due to the vulnerability of your operations, they have been seized indefinitely. In addition, DarkSide has unlawfully seized private company data, which includes the military IDs, social security numbers, health insurance records, and bank routing numbers of your employees. They have threatened to release this information publicly if we do not meet these demands as follows. In exchange for the stolen data and ransomware decryption key, we must directly pay DarkSide 75 Bitcoin, which roughly equates to 4.4 million US dollars. The group has left you with no timetable for their demands, but we can assume your time to act is limited. So, what does a cease in operations mean for Colonial Pipeline? Let's review CPC's share in the oil supply market and the current state of the domestic fuel inventory. CPC owns the largest pipeline in the country and contributes 45% of the East Coast oil supply from Texas to New Jersey. The major markets that you serve are vital to United States transportation infrastructures. You most notably deliver refined fuel to commercial gas stations and distributors, major airports and travel junctions, and critical military fueling depots. The pipeline is capable of delivering 2.5 million barrels a day, which is roughly 12.7% of the total number of barrels consumed domestically per day in the United States. Additionally, it serves nearly half the demand for oil in your regional market. The national oil inventory has a comfortable reserve that currently sits at 235.8 million barrels, but we can expect this number to decrease drastically under the effects of the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. And that brings us to where we are now, the decision point. Before assessing the possible solutions, there are 5 contextual points we must review to set parameters. The first being that you, the CEO, Joseph Blount, are to exercise complete unilateral control over the company's decision. The second is that we are facing mounting pressure from company stakeholders to take decisive action. Your shareholders expect their investment to prosper, and employees demand the return of their stolen data. Third, it's important to understand that the private firm we contracted this morning of the attack have failed to uncover any leads regarding the attackers and their means, besides their identity. Fourth, we have been approached by the federal law enforcement agencies, namely the FBI, who are prepared to provide us with fully backed federal resources. And lastly, it's important to note that due to the vulnerability of our operative systems while they're under attack, we cannot resume operations until CPC receives a decryption agent from DarkSide.
With those key facts and the context in mind, Fordham Consulting Group sees 2 viable options for you, the CEO, to make in response to DarkSide's ransomware attack. Option 1, pay the ransom. Purchase and give to DarkSide the 75 Bitcoin worth $4.4 million with the goal of gaining immediate access to the stolen files and having operations resume as quickly as possible via the decryption key. Option 2, don't pay the ransom and try and develop an internal plan to restore operations and secure the stolen data without paying and therefore without the decryption key. The goal of this would be to act within the bounds of FBI guidelines to not cooperate with ransomware attackers and to instead seek justice and resolve from federal sources. We'd like to note that non-action is often an overlooked option in difficult decision-making situations. However, in this particular situation, it is completely inadvisable as it doesn't act to restore operations either with or without the decryption key. Now we're going to look at the implications of the shutdown on CPC's financials, as well as the implications of a rise in gas price resulting from the shutdown on average American consumers. As a private company, the only available public financial data on CPC is from the fiscal year 2020. At the end of fiscal year 2020, CPC had 3.1 billion in assets versus 2.6 billion in liabilities. Full year revenue for 2020 was 1.3 billion with net income of 420 million. Keeping calculations simple, this represents a potential daily loss of 3.56 million in revenue and a potential daily loss of 1.15 million in daily net income as a result of the shutdown in operations. Analyzing the demanded ransom in the context of these numbers, the $4.4 million value of the 75 Bitcoin represents only 1.05% of 2020 annual net income. And comparing paying the ransom to having operations shut down, it would be a break even after about 4 days of shutdown. As we said earlier, they lose about 1.15 million per day. Looking at the effect of a potential increase in gas prices on American consumers, we refer to the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, which is a nonprofit that released a study in May 2021 regarding the gas burden of low-income versus high-income Americans. The study found that transportation costs are the second largest expense for average Americans after housing. Transportation accounts for 13% of the average American's annual income, but can be as high as 30% for low-income Americans. Low income in this study is defined as 200% the federal poverty line. So if this study were to be done again with the federal poverty line as the bar for low income, the disparity would be even greater. Low-income Americans are disproportionately affected by rising gas prices. The average burden of low-income Americans is 13.8% versus 4.1% for high-income Americans, meaning that increases in gas price have a far greater negative impact on their discretionary income. To take a look at an example of the effect that rising gas prices have on low-income Americans, let's take a look at an example of a high-income and low-income American and see what the increase in gas price does to their discretionary income. We assume that they both have a discretionary income of 10% of their annual income. And we input the average gas burden or percentage of annual income spent on gas for both high and low income Americans. And we assume for both that gas price increases by 20%. For a high income American, that 20% increase would raise their gas burden to 4.9%, with that increase coming out of discretionary income, lowering it to 9.2%, which represents an 8% decrease in discretionary income. However, for the low income American, the 20% increase in gas prices brings their gas burden to 16.6%, lowering discretionary income to 7.2%, which represents a 28% drop in discretionary income. So you can see how rising gas prices clearly greatly negative affect low income Americans substantially more than high income Americans.
Now, when analyzing the legal aspects of this situation, we need to determine whether there are any legal provisions to help guide our decision-making process. And subsequently, we need to be cognizant of any potential lawsuits that CPC can face as a result of this decision. So when making a decision, there are three main questions we need to answer. First, we need to determine if there's a legal directive that will answer the question of which stakeholders' needs should be prioritized in the handling of this crisis. The Investment Company Act of 1940 outlines the concept of fiduciary duty, in which a company's board members are bound by a duty to act in the best interest of its shareholders. As a result, CPC will need to conduct itself in a way that minimizes the company's losses and best protects the company in the future. Second, we need to establish whether there are any legal measures that would prevent us from either paying the ransom or choosing not to pay the ransom. We can look to the FBI anti-ransom guidelines, which states that the FBI does not support ransom capitulation. However, US Code Section 1202 states that it is only illegal to receive, possess, or dispose of ransom payments. This means that while the FBI encourages companies to seek legal recourse through the criminal justice system, it is also legal for that entity to make a ransom payment if they choose to do so. And lastly, we need to be cognizant of any legal recourse to see if the justice system is actually a viable option in helping to recover damages. According to US Code Section 3184, the US does not currently have an extradition treaty with Russia. Given the unlikelihood of Russia cooperating with US authorities, any attempt at working through the justice system will likely be extremely expensive and have a high chance of failure. We have identified three potential avenues for lawsuits. The first being lawsuits by contract holders as a result of CPC being unable to deliver their oil. While this is a potentially significant threat, we believe that a ransomware attack would trigger a force majeure clause, which essentially voids a contract due to unforeseen circumstances beyond that entity's control. Generally, acts of war or terrorism would qualify to trigger a force majeure clause, and we believe that a ransomware attack designed to cripple critical infrastructure would fall under this category. As a result, we do not believe contract holders have a compelling legal case if they choose to sue CPC for this event. As for shareholders, we do believe that there is a potential for a lawsuit due to a dereliction of fiduciary duty. This lawsuit would not be based upon us being a victim of a ransomware attack, but would instead be based upon our failure to handle these attacks in the best interest of shareholders and by not taking enough action to fix our cybersecurity flaws to prevent future attacks. And lastly, we are also concerned about the potential for an employee negligence suit as a result of losing their sensitive information in these attacks. While it is not illegal to be the victim of an unforeseen attack, we need to make sure that our chosen solution mitigates potential damages as a result of negligence from CPC. When looking at legal precedents, we've identified two similar cases that could potentially impact our handling of this situation. Eugenio v. Berberian is a case that was filed by a LabCorp shareholder against its leadership for breaching fiduciary responsibilities. LabCorp had been the victim of two separate ransomware attacks in the same year, and in their handling of the case, they underreported the scope of the data breach and failed to report the second breach to the SEC. Additionally, they argued that LabCorp had not taken strong enough measures to fix the vulnerabilities in their system after the first breach, leading to a subsequent second breach. This case is not being filed due to the ransomware attack, but it rather focuses on the leadership's decision to downplay the severity of the attack and their complacency in preventing future attacks. The second relevant case is Daniels et al. Versus DCH Healthcare Authority, which is a hospital system in Alabama that lost sensitive patient information after a ransomware attack. DCH lost sensitive records in an attack very, very similar to the one faced by CPC, and they chose to pay the ransom 5 days later. This class action lawsuit filed by a group of disgruntled patients alleges that the records that were kept on that computer system were left vulnerable to cyber attacks. And as a result, they argued that they are now at a heightened risk of fraud and identity theft as a result of the data breach. To learn from this case, CPC should do everything in its power moving forward to protect the data of their employees and minimize the future risk of identity theft. So when considering both of these cases, it's clear that CPC's solution needs to emphasize both accountability now and in the future.
At this point, we're prepared to give you our proposed solution. We at Fordham Consulting Group believe that the best course of action for you, the CEO, Joseph Blount, is to pay the ransom. First and foremost, we believe that this is a financially superior option than attempting to go around the decryption key and resume operations independently. The company can afford to pay the ransom as it is only about 1% of annual net income. And furthermore, the shutdown would result in a loss of profits that would be equal to the ransom after 4 days. Finally, rising gas prices will have a disproportionate negative impact on low-income Americans. As Alex explained, this option is fully legally viable, as the FBI guidelines are just that, guidelines. We are not violating any laws or regulations by paying the ransom, and it acts to protect shareholders and employees and potentially prevent lawsuits. Finally, we believe that it is ethically superior, primarily due to its potential for immediate protection of all stakeholders, including employees, shareholders, and the general public, as we will now explain.
We will now thoroughly explore the ethical dimensions of the case and outline how the proposed solution results in the greatest amount of net ethicality. We believe that the threat to CPC is non-absolute. In other words, the vested interests of multiple parties are contingent on your decision, and there is no one superior interest group that you must satisfy. Our solution navigates the concerns of these many groups by immediately protecting 3 major stakeholders. Firstly, by paying the ransom, CPC is acting to protect its shareholders. We've established through our financial analysis that the ransom payment is a near negligible cost to shareholders and strives to actually retain future earnings. This ensures that our shareholders are protected from significant monetary losses that may occur as a result of the attack. Why is this important? Because you, the CEO, Joseph Blount, are acting on the virtue of trust. You demonstrate a commitment to benevolence and integrity in your relationships that the value of trust is commonly founded upon. Secondly, capitulation offers CPC the best chance of alleviating the threat that DarkSide has made against your employees. We assert that it is your ethical duty to fulfill promises of protection made to these valued employees. By exercising this duty, you act against the wrongful nature of deceit and selfishness that a company may take. Moreover, CPC demonstrates willingness to actively combat evil and malintent toward others. Lastly, we seek to satisfy your concern for the general public. By working to prevent detrimental shocks to our economy, Colonial Pipelines is protecting the welfare of millions of Americans. Parents whose child's education is dependent on getting them to school in the morning. Hardworking breadwinners who require transportation to work, where they earn to provide necessary provisions for their families. And small business owners who rely on your contributions to the transportation infrastructure to conduct their businesses at a cost-efficient rate.
As CEO, it is your responsibility to set the ethical standard which drives the internal company culture. By paying the ransom, you, Joseph Blount, set the standard that CPC cares deeply about protecting all stakeholders, including employees. This should boost employee morale and drive a healthy company culture in the future. Furthermore, the fiduciary duty as CEO has ethical implications as well as being a legal duty. As CEO, the legal fiduciary duty is upheld, as Alex showed in the legal analysis. However, Simply performing and upholding the legal analysis does not fulfill all of the ethical aspects of the fiduciary duty. There are several steps that can be taken to bolster the ethical superiority of paying the ransom as a means of upholding one's legal fiduciary duty, which John will explain now.
Fordham Consulting Group wants to emphasize that no morally reprehensible act on behalf of Colonial Pipelines has led to this fallout, but that you are victims of an unjust attack. As such, any decisive action that you, Mr. Blount, take may still result in some amount of unfairness. Given this position, we would like to suggest two supplemental solutions to help mitigate outstanding damages. We understand that your employees may still feel a sense of vulnerability, given their data is now permanently possessed by untrustworthy actors. We suggest that Colonial Pipelines establishes a credit monitoring program for its employees, which would help reconcile an initial failure to protect their valuable information. Moreover, you would be sponsoring the long-term protection of vital human capital to Colonial Pipelines. The rate of a premium coverage plan in the United States averages $39 per employee. At 500 employees, this initiative would cost slightly less than $100,000 annually, a cost that is well worth it. We also suggest that Colonial Pipelines commits to continued cooperation with the FBI as you seek to recover lost funds and exact justice on the perpetrators. It is Colonial Pipeline's responsibility to fight the potential perpetuation of crime that may be fostered as a result of your payment. This supports the government in a losing battle against cybercrime and looks after other members of the business community who may be targets in the future. As part of our ethical analysis, we would like to closely examine why solution B, to not pay the ransom, is completely inadvisable. Failure to pay will likely result in 3 detrimental consequences, the first being a release of the stolen data. We can assume that based off precedent, DarkSide will release this data if we do not pay. And the information, as vital as social security numbers, will greatly affect employee livelihoods if it's made accessible to the public. To not pay the ransom is acting complicitly, and as a result, directly harming your employees. The nature of this attack also suggests that your pipeline will be shut down for weeks. To date, DarkSide has successfully launched over 5,000 attacks without capture. FBI research also determines that the average time to restore operations is 21 days, which we can assume will be far longer given the strength of this particular attack. Colonial Pipelines will lose tens of millions in profit belonging to the shareholders and will have a tarnished reputation, which will discourage future and current contract holders from conducting business with you. Lastly, there will be immediate shocks to the oil market. As Mike established earlier, dramatic increases in oil prices drastically reduce American discretionary income. This shock would be particularly harmful to low-income Americans. After a review of these risks, you may be asking yourself, what about the glaring possibility of double extortion in regards to solution A? Well, we acknowledge that it is a possibility, but we would assert that in the worst case scenario with our proposed solution, that we will ultimately arrive at this unfavorable outcome outlined above, just down a trivial amount of profit. In conclusion, the ransomware attack on our systems has left us with 2 legally viable solutions, to pay or not to pay. We strongly advise that it is in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders to capitulate and pay the demanded sum to the dark side. In doing so, CPC protects the company's financial stature, the shareholders' trust in your management and operations, CPC's employees' privacy and livelihood, and the welfare of the general American public. We believe that this issue is reducible to a matter of self-defense, which in turn protects the interests of those who have that you have inherent responsibility to. With a gun to your head, you surrender your wallet because your prosperity dictates that of those surrounding you. With that said, Fordham Consulting Group thanks you for your consideration and strongly urges you to do right by your stakeholders and yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because there are several different aspects of personalities of the CEO who is segmented into several different people, I would like to, I'll have my comments at the end, but I would like the other parts of the CEO to ask questions.
So
Maybe Greg?
perhaps I'll start with a few questions. I'm very much interested in my obligation to both employees as well as the general public. How is it that you propose addressing those, and which should take priority? I saw a lot of focus on the fiduciary responsibilities to my stakeholders, and I'm quite familiar with those. I'm struggling why a credit card breach monitoring or identity theft protection should be sufficient. And as far as the general public is concerned, are there any other alternatives for addressing those?
In this case, so with regards to the fiduciary duty and whether that means that we have a duty to our employees and to the general public as well, I would actually agree that yes, it does. There is some tie to that as well. First of all, employees, keeping them happy, that's improving the human capital of the company. One of the things that we would really like to avoid, and that we think you should want to avoid as well, is the possibility of your employees feeling like their company doesn't care about them and feeling like that their company is going to turn their backs on them, and having them decide in droves potentially to quit their jobs and go work for a different company that will protect their sensitive information. Or if they do lose that information, that they would be okay with helping them out more and giving them better avenues to protect themselves. So our credit monitoring is not a full solution to the problem, but it's the best thing that we can do given the circumstances to try to alleviate some of those concerns from employees. And as for the general population as well, for them, this is more of just an ethical duty as a business. We believe that it's important to make sure that our stakeholders, even if it doesn't directly impact our bottom line, in the end, some of that will end up trickling down to our bottom line. Maybe some of our other competitors or potentially other companies that use our services from us may look to go somewhere else with their business. Maybe they will look to hopefully construct another pipeline or try some other avenue to work around that in the event that we're unable to deliver our oil on time and on demand.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to one of my alternate personalities.
All right, I'll go. I was raising my hand in hopes that you'd call on me, but I'll just go. I have a real problem with basically paying money to criminals. And how do you know that we can trust them that they will do what they're promising, in that they will give us the decryption key and will not do bad things with the data that they've stolen from us? How do we trust criminals is really my question. Why is that the answer? To pay them?
I think John touched on this when he spoke about the risk of double extortion. I think that's partly what you're referring to, if I'm not mistaken. The way we see it, the $4.4 million when compared to annual net income is so negligible to the company that it is worthwhile, since it has the potential to provide immediate protection via the decryption key. If we were to be double extorted, or if they are to use, we can assume that they are going to use these funds for nefarious purposes. But we return to the analogy of somebody having a gun to your head. I don't think anyone would say that you're liable or ethically reprehensible for funding a mugger because you got mugged.
That's a good point. I guess another question I have is there any trade organization and I guess one of my problems is that if we pay this ransom, then who's next? And are we really helping as citizens of our society, helping to eliminate these kind of things if we're going to basically perpetuate them? And I'm just wondering if there's any help we can get from customers or suppliers, maybe some of the big oil companies. how have they dealt with these things?
Yeah, so I can go ahead and answer that. We definitely are concerned for other business owners and their stature. We're aware that paying the ransom, in essence, will maybe perpetuate future criminal enterprise or future criminal activity. But at the end of the day, FBI research shows that by the year 2031, there will be annually $265 billion in ransom payments made to corporations throughout the world. Our 4 million is a small percentage of that. So while yes, it may feel slightly morally reprehensible to do so, this is a pretty negligible amount of damage to the greater pool of ransom payments, which again is nearing 300 billion per year. The largest ransom demands right now, as it stands, set by precedent, have been up to $50 million. And with 37% of businesses being hit by ransomware in this year alone, our payment is, again, just a small fish in a large pool.
All right, thank you.
And to kind of add to that as well, using the same analogy as before with the mugger with the gun to your head, the way to prevent this isn't to tell the mugger, no, I'm not going to give you the money and risk being shot. The way to prevent this is you give them their money and then you take preventative measures to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. There's nothing that we can do to prevent the situation now that it's already happened. We really only have one option, and it's to pay that ransom, which happens to be something that we can absolutely afford, even if they do choose to double extort. But the way to handle this going forward is to put in better protections. To use the mugger example, light up your streets more. So, walk with more people at night, things like that, to be able to prevent and secure yourself. And so in this case, it would be to upgrade our cybersecurity and protect against all the vulnerabilities that we had before, and look into other ways to monitor and protect ourselves and safeguard from future attacks.
All right, thanks. And that ends my questions. Thank you.
Jeff?
I'd like to pick up where Greg left off, because I'm kind of a hard-nosed CEO, and I'm probably going to pick a fight with you. I don't care. It's $4 million. That's a negligible amount, but you keep kind of going back to that. What I care about is that somebody strong arms my business. I'm the CEO of this place. I'm the one that's accountable, and I've got a criminal who's moved into my house. The analogy for me of a mugger doesn't hold up very well. For me, it's like somebody breaks down your door, they walk into your house, they sit on their couch, and they say, until you pay me, I'm not going to leave. And what you're suggesting is we should just pay him and hope that this guy gets up and leaves. And the reason that they're doing this is because everybody else in my neighborhood paid him off. That's why we're at 300 billion a year. That's why it's growing, because everybody keeps paying them off. And they're paying them off in the auspices of a greater good. It's protecting the public, in general, because we're only going to pay $4 million, and we're going to help. We're going to protect everybody by protecting their information. Now, I also know that there are cyber criminals who will plant malware with a timer in your system so that 6 months later, everything's encrypted again. There are other cyber criminals that will give fake encryption keys, so you have to pay them twice. There are some situations where they've already copied all the data. You pay them to unencrypt your systems, and they still have all the data anyway, and they sell it twice. I don't like dealing with unethical criminals. I don't think anybody does. But you know what? A couple of years ago, I was a victim of identity theft. Took me a couple of days, some headaches because I had to do it myself. But things like social security numbers and credit card numbers and things like that, you can deal with those, right? And chances are we're going to have to anyway. So I would rather spend the $4 million and using one of the other options that you suggested in supporting our employees with tracking systems and how to change their bank account numbers and counseling, not just counseling, but I mean actually hire consultants as a service, like I would mental health services, to help them mitigate any losses. I would much rather spend the money on that than beef up our systems like they should have been, than pay somebody unforeseen who's already broken into my system once. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my response would be that what we believe makes this response ethical, again, is that this is a non-absolute situation. It's not as simple as you dealing with a man in your house in the living room, but you also have your family to consider, who may be your employees. Like we also said, there's the greater American public as well. These are entities that we really have to consider, given that our duty to our employees is vital, and B, more importantly, if you look at how critical our infrastructure is to the greater transportation infrastructure, there really could be some serious fallout that we're responsible for. Like Mike said earlier, drastic hikes in gas prices seriously affect the welfare and livelihood of low-income Americans. And at 50% of, or at making up 50% of the market share of the East Coast oil supply, there would be certainly a hike in prices that would affect this welfare.
And to kind of add to that as well, if you do want to use that analogy of someone breaking into your house and saying that he won't leave until you pay them, imagine they break into your house and that person is 7'2", 300 pounds. You have no weapons. The police are not coming. He's in your house and you have no way of getting him out. That's the equivalent situation that we have here. We have no legal recourse. We have no way of getting them out of our systems. The damage is already done. They've broken into the house and we have to do what they say and hope that they leave so that we can begin to fix the problem in the first place. If he's still in our house, it doesn't matter how much we beef up our security systems. We can add as many alarms as we want. We can get as many guard dogs and security around the perimeter of the house as we want. But as long as they're inside our house, we don't have any other options. So in this case, paying them the $4 million is a way, it may not necessarily be the end all be all, but it is the best chance that we have at solving the problem as quickly as possible and potentially giving us a way to fix it in the future.
Yeah, and then most importantly, I would also
most importantly, I would also just like to add on, we definitely recognize that there may be alternative uses of the $4 million. Like you mentioned, it could be put into programs to help employees recover from this fallout. But that being said, what are employees and what are stakeholders if the company isn't generating any profit? Like I said earlier, the company could be down for at least 21 days and likely more. There's no immediate way to restore operations. And after a month of operations being down, we're losing tens of millions of dollars in profit. So for us, that $4 million all of a sudden does not become as negligible. It's now put in the context of tens of millions in losses.
Furthermore, I think you open up your liabilities in terms of both employee and shareholder lawsuits. Those become far more viable options for them to file against you, as opposed to paying the ransom, which is, whether effective or not, clearly intended to immediately protect the interest of those stakeholders.
I'm imagining the lawsuits, if we pay it, they don't unlock our systems. Now we're out $4 million. We still have an interrupted supply. We have no control over where the data goes or where it went. And that scares me.
Absolutely. It's risk management. It is the 4.4 negligible enough for you, the CEO, to give as an attempt to gain immediate access with the knowledge that we might be double extorted in 6 months? We could be in the same position.
No, it's not about the money. It's about the liability.
Maria, do you have any questions?
Yeah, wow, this is a really tough spot we're in. Yeah, I mean, do you have, I guess my question is just, are there examples of other companies that have, successfully kind of outsmarted these people without having to pay? And I know that the 4 million is nothing, absolutely, in the greater scheme of things, but going back to what my other personality said, I'm a bit concerned of like contributing to increased criminality, even if we're only a small percentage of that. Just the fact that we're just another company that went ahead and paid the ransom, and that for the greater good of the business world, I just feel like we're contributing to a negative aspect there. But kind of back to my question, is there another way to get around this? Do you have examples of companies that have either outsmarted or the FBI has been able to help?
Yeah, absolutely. The most notable example that comes to mind was an attack on Ottawa hospital's healthcare systems in 2017. And while I can't quote the specifics, the FBI has given this case to us as precedent in our initial investigation. And what happened at this Ottawa hospital was that a ransomware very similar to the one that we got attacked by latched on to life support systems. When it occupied these critical systems, the company was put in an awful inflection point. The threat was that if they do not provide payment in a short window of time, that they would essentially shut down these life support systems. And this was a very notable case because it was the first one where real human lives were at stake as a result of ransomware. Now, what the company was able to do was meet the attackers on their playing field and take the warfare to the cyber ether. And what they did, without any indication to the attackers, of course, is that they cleared their data on these life support systems because they conveniently had a thorough backup in place. Due to this backup, they were able to wipe the data, retain the life support, and essentially be mitigated of this headache in this awful situation that they were put in. Now, like I said earlier, we hired a private investigating company to start on this for us, and we've been approached by the FBI, who's been helping us over the past 12 hours with their fully backed resources. We can assume that based on their information and their discoveries that our operations are completely compromised. We're left completely vulnerable, and we don't have the backups in place to actually do what a company like the Ottawa Hospital Company did in this situation. We're kind of confronted with actually meeting the demand or not meeting the demand.
And to add on to that a little bit, the DCH healthcare case that I mentioned before, in which they actually did pay the ransom money, they had their systems restored after the ransom attack was paid. It's not a guarantee, but there is precedent that in many cases when the ransom is paid, and many times the groups will actually release the systems and release the data. Now, whether they keep a copy for themselves to sell a second time remains to be seen. But at the very least, there is a high likelihood that if the ransom is paid, we will at very least get back operation of our systems so that we can begin to find a better solution to move forward and prevent this from happening again in the future.
Yeah, and then to address that second fold on your question, is it really acceptable to just pull the excuse that we're going to be small fish in a big pond of payment? And we absolutely recognize that may not be seen as acceptable or morally acceptable. But what we're going to have to do, I think, in this situation is look at how vital of an infrastructure we are. Of those $300 billion given to ransomware attackers, a lot of them come from mom and pop shops or non-vital infrastructures. Very rare do you have a case where a company can latch on to something like a major oil provider, or like I said earlier, a healthcare provider who may not have been so lucky in previous cases. So I think for us, we need to look at the fallout that is immediately in front of us. And that is, of course, the one that pertains to the general public. How is their welfare and livelihood going to be affected in the short term and potentially in the long term, but mostly in the short term, if we can't afford to keep our operations going?
You all have done a great job. Does anyone have anything more quickly to add? We have 1 minute. Oh, we have 58 seconds. Anything else? All
That
right.
should be sufficient.
We will move now into where we are, in fact, the people that we already are, with none of this schizophrenia of, dividing ourselves up. I'll come back to, I'll start, but I'll want to come back at the end and encourage other judges to do that, about advice that we might have for your 10-minute. But right now I want to talk about, what you've accomplished in my opinion. I was a little skeptical at first because you were dealing with an issue that had already happened. And the decision that you made to do the ransom was a foregone conclusion because that was what the company had already done. But you found a way, in my view, to demonstrate a variety of research and approaches that I thought was really very effective. You three had good presence. You were very credible as a consulting company, which helps with arguments. And it's a complicated issue, and I think that the information that you provided was really very credible. I'll come back later, but I want to give everyone else a chance to talk about this particular presentation, and then we'll talk to you about the 10-minute any thoughts you have.
I'll go ahead. I thought you did a really nice job. And I really, in particular, I think you addressed our questions really well and very professionally. And, we were, play acting or whatever, but we did have somewhat of an emotional response and you were able to respond in a very logical way. I thought that was great. On the written presentation, the feedback overall, very good. I thought it would be nice if you had maybe more graphics and less numbers in it. And what I mean by that is, for example, on the slide that had the consumer gas burden about, the consumer's burden, there was a lot of numbers there. And it might've been good to have bar graphs, like one bar graph for the affluent people and just maybe color coded for affluent and people that are, not as affluent. And that was a great point that this is really impacting people that can least afford it, and it's sort of, I think that had a lot of impact, and it would have been nice to have that maybe presented in a more graphical way. And that's advice in general. I think it's kind of counterintuitive, but the higher up you are in the organization, the more you dumb things down in a way, make things shorter, bullet points and graphs instead of words. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's at least my experience in corporate America. And then, I'm a compulsive proofreader, and I couldn't help but notice there were a couple typos, and it's really minor, things. I think the phrase "company's decision" should have been in the possessive. It was like "companies" plural, and I think you meant "company" apostrophe S decision. And then there was just a grammatical error. One of the, I think about the phrase "lawfully void" should have been "lawfully void." Just little typos, but again, if you're in front of top management, you got to pay attention to details like that because a lot of times they do. But like I said, overall, I thought you did a really good job, and in particular, answering our questions. So thank you.
Next.
Who's next?
I really liked your presentation. I thought it was very tight. I thought it was very to the point. Often when you're addressing CEOs and board of directors, they may see half a dozen presentations a day. So I think that your context was short, directly to the point, kind of hammered home all the information you needed to get without much extraneous information. I thought your outline was really good. I really liked the attention to some of your language detail, like consistently referring to us as you, as opposed to they, or speaking of the company in third person, which, is a common challenge for people. I thought that was really good too. I especially liked, I was just specifically drawn to this presentation because I wanted to see how you would handle a situation that is created a tremendous amount of consternation for everyone. Southern California, where I live, was hit several years ago. A number of our hospitals were hit with ransomware. In one case, they paid and they got back their systems in a couple of days. In another case, they shut down all of their systems, unplugged them from the internet, and started installing backups, and took a very different course of action. Both were hospitals, by the way. And in your scenario, though, our scope has been limited so much that it's not really that much of a decision. I mean, we have no backups. We have no way to go offline. We don't apparently have any manual way to move oil. So there isn't really much else that we can do. I would have liked to have seen that opened up a little bit more so that we actually had a decision to make. Because as tough as this is, it is sort of a slam dunk. But I do know a lot of companies are faced with a slam dunk decision. That's why they're targeted. So no ding there, just to broaden the scope of the conversation a little bit more. That would have been nice. Other than that, I think you guys did a really good presentation with a difficult subject. That's all I have.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the three of you were excellent presenters, and I echo what my colleague said. You know, the fact that you stayed in character and was wonderful. I really appreciate how you answered our questions. I think that you did a very, very good job with those. I think that the one thing that I might have liked to see a little bit more of, and maybe this is kind of what others have said, is, you know, is there another option? Do we have another option? Is there something else that we can do? And, you know, what is the weighing between the ethics of contributing to more ransomware in the future, you know, versus the ethical considerations of our businesses continue to be suspended? I think really from an ethical standpoint, to me, that feels like the biggest ethical dilemma, and maybe even just dedicating a little bit on, you know, that balance, I think would be helpful. And maybe that's something that you could think about for tomorrow's presentation as well. You know, because I think that everyone understands the negative ethical implications of going, you know, suspending business. Absolutely. Got it. And you did a great job covering those. But what are the ethical implications of contributing to this criminality? So that's just, I guess, my only kind of feedback. But I think the three of you did an awesome job, and I'm really glad I'm not actually the CEO of that company, because I would never want to be in that position.
All right, so I will not repeat a lot of the comments. I do agree. Good presence, excellent presentation, very well researched financials, very well researched legal implications. I was waiting for you to get to the ethics. And at times it felt like an afterthought or a nice to have. You addressed it very well in response to our questions, but I would have liked to have seen more meat on that in the presentation itself. Some of the things you voiced over, but you didn't put in your presentation material. There's also the emphasis, which again, you addressed in response to questions, but why, back to Maria's point, why is it ethical to pay in and of itself? And then your solution felt very much as a yes or no. So it always helps to give some nuances, such as, and a basis for it. I think Jeff clearly stated there was no options. You don't have any backup plans. You don't have vulnerabilities. You don't have this. So part of the solution is not just pay the ransom and you're done, but pay the ransom, and then what vulnerability fixes do you recommend get put in place? How do you use or take advantage of this crisis to bolster your values and mission statement as a company to demonstrate your ethical conviction. So a little bit more around those ethics would help your presentation.
Thank you. I had some concerns too regarding how you might approach the 10-minute tomorrow. You had the opportunity to call out in the financials. You talked about certainly something that is an ethical issue, the impact on the low-income people, but you could have made a bigger issue of that in the larger scheme of things, because it wasn't just a financial, it was a heralding of really opening the door to the kind of dilemma that, faces you. I was grateful that, you didn't quote the CEO saying that his ultimate reason for doing it was for America. And while some people might think that that was corny, it does speak to the fact that, and I don't know enough about the company, but that lens, while it was certainly self-serving for other reasons to pay, the magnitude of harm to the East Coast, to the country, to every level of every income-based person is really pretty extensive. And you did make reference to it, but I'm thinking that as you put together your 20 minutes, and I just want to say, your 10 minutes, sorry, I gave you 10 minutes more than you're actually going to get. In your 10 minutes, you don't have to deal with financial. In fact, you shouldn't deal with financial, and you shouldn't deal with legal. You're only called back to talk about the ethics piece of it. So you may want to think you have great information throughout it. You may want to think about not just giving back the ethics part of it, but how you can incorporate other aspects that you didn't necessarily call out as ethical that could be considered ethical. And I think that it's important to do as was suggested, the balance of making the decision ethical, the debate part of it, to pay or not to pay, and how that plays in, because I didn't hear as much about that. But again, I think that was a really strong presentation. Does anyone have any thoughts in addition to, their next step is tomorrow, and
I have one additional tip. Don't be afraid to use emotion. This is a business presentation. It is to a CEO, but when you're talking about ethics, it's not just the numbers and the percentages of dollars that low-income bracket people have. Tie it to something emotional that someone will care about. Tie it to a single mom who can't get to work and the vulnerabilities. Tie it to an entire community on the West Coast being vulnerable to attacks. Make that emotional connection so that it becomes a feeling as well as a financial decision of just statistics.
Yeah, and I'd like to pick up on that as well. Throughout your presentation, you're mentioning that $4 million is sort of a drop in the bucket. I would look up, if you haven't already, look up financial minimalism and ethical minimalisms, because when you talk about ethics with people who know ethics, that's what they're going to hear a lot of times, is basing the ethics on a monetary or a money principle, which is going to be a challenge to overcome. So there's just kind of an FYI there. The other suggestion I have is in your analogies of a mugger, maybe I'm thinking a different analogy might be what happens if there's a natural disaster and the grid is shut down? And so now the oil company can't go online. In a natural disaster, the communities, the government, a lot of people will help low-income people or people just in general who are victims. Is this analogous? I mean, is there a do no harm component to with other services that are available in the case of a disaster? And you know, there could be a potential where, or maybe another analogy could be, what if this is a bad actor who doesn't want money? You know, they want to shut you down, like it happened in India. You know, for 6 weeks they shut down half their power grid. They didn't want money. They wanted to shut them down. So what would you do in that kind of case? How would you benefit the welfare of everyone who depends upon you if it wasn't a choice? Now you do have a choice, so take that choice. If you didn't have a choice, right, you could compare the two just as an idea, but that's about all I've got for you guys. You guys are good.
Anyone else have any comments to make
Yeah,
before we allow the team to ask us questions? Yeah, sure.
Jeff reminded me of something that I probably should have mentioned earlier. I thought the point you made, I think it was in response to one of our questions, that this has already happened and we can't change the past. And this is the situation you're in. Because I think us, you know, playing the CEO, we're like real emotional, like we want to fight this thing. We want to fight it. Well, no, it's already happened. And now we just have to move forward. What are the best options going forward? So I think that's tying it in with whatever analogy you use. I think it's good to point that out. I thought that was really, really powerful.
And just make sure tomorrow that you're really focused on the fact that you've got only 10 minutes to make the ethical case, and you don't need to do anything else except create that, as been suggested in a couple of ways that really speaks to what you didn't have a chance in the broader spectrum of things, you know, to do. I interrupted someone, or somebody else wanted to talk.
Oh, sorry. I just had one thought actually, from the, you know, I've been kind of turning this dilemma over in my head. And, you know, one of the things that could minimize the ethical concerns around contributing to, you know, continued criminal activity is, you know, after we pay the ransom, we go back, you know, online, everything's hunky-dory, we put in our cybersecurity, we help our employees with their identity theft potential. Is there something that we can do as a company to assist the, you know, the government or, you know, other oil and gas producers? Is there some way that we can work together to prevent these types of things in the future? Because I think the fear is just you pay the 4 million, and then they go on to the next company, and then the next company, and then they come back around to you. So is there some way that we can minimize the ethical harm of paying the 4 million by finding some way to help the greater good and preventing it in the future? You know, maybe creating some type of you know, I don't know, anti-ransomware association or something. Just a thought.
Thank you all very much. And in the time we have left, do you three have any questions of us?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to say thank you so much for the feedback. It's extremely helpful for our presentation tomorrow, and we really appreciate everyone taking the time and listening to what we had to present on today.
How are you handling the presentation tomorrow? How many of you are talking?
It will be Michael and I presenting tomorrow.
Okay.
Also, I'm going to turn off my camera very quickly to go plug in my computer again. Apologies.
Yeah, I guess that just leaves me. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming out and doing all of this with us. And yeah, I thought your questions were super insightful, as was your responses to our presentation and the things that you had to say about, you know, critiques and just, you know, other things that we did well and things that we can do better moving forward.
Well, I think you're all very good presenters, and you obviously had good command of the knowledge. And I think you'll enjoy tomorrow. I mean, the whole point of this is to give you the kind of grounding that, you, the incredible work that you all put into this. It's not easy to do this during a pandemic. And so it's great that you did what you did. And if there's no other questions, we'll just wish you good luck in your next two presentations. And thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate the judges as well as the great, let's see, the Fordham Consulting Group.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.